So let's slow down and talk about gag degradation. If you are wanting, so the notes, God, the notes have just continued to grow for this lecture, so use them with caution. But also a great resource for this lecture is Lippincott's. Have you guys used Lippincott's yet? Biochemistry? No? Show of hands, who has looked at Lippincott's biochemistry? Not many. Okay, that's the main book I would recommend for my lectures. If you feel like way over encumbered, then you can look at The Cell. That's kind of like undergrad basic biochem, and then Lippincott's is much more clinically oriented. So if you understand Lippincott's, I'd go there. So anyway, there's a bunch of figures from Lippincott's in here. Okay, so any questions before I move on? Okay, speed, fast, slow, okay. Tell me if I'm too fast. You want me to go slower? Slower, okay. All right, so I tried to summarize this. I would read through this slide, but I tried to summarize it for you easily. So basically, you have this large carbohydrate molecule, and you're starting to metabolize the GAG, right? You're trying to break it down. And so here I show what you're doing. In this step, you're taking off a sulfur. In this step, you're taking off a sugar. Taking off a sulfur, taking off an acyl chain, taking off a sugar, taking off a sugar, taking off a sulfur, okay? At each point, if you don't have that enzyme, you have a disease, a genetic disease, okay? So the first one you don't have is Hunter syndrome, right? You're not taking off the sulfur. The second one is Hurler syndrome. Then you get to this disease, Sanfilippo syndrome, which was originally classified as the same based on presentation, but now we know it's basically 4 different diseases that all manifest similarly because they're in this chain. And unfortunately, the letters they were given are not in order. So it's A, C, B, something else, and then D. But you don't really need to know that as much. But the point is they are 4 different diseases that are classified together. And then Sly syndrome's the last one. Okay, so now they're not super. Initially I had this on a ton of different slides, but it just kind of seemed to go too long. So I tried to put it all on one. I'm going to fade in color underlines that are the same here. So this is for patient presentation. What is the same with all these? Okay, so developmental disabilities, all 4 of these boxes. Okay. They're going to be to varying extents, and I made you a sweet review table if I do say so myself. Okay. Then there's this little line, corneal clouding. Okay, so Hurler syndrome has that, Sly syndrome has that. I put a green line here because Hunter syndrome does not have corneal clouding. Okay, and they have MPS numbers too, right? Hunter syndrome MPS 2, Hurler's MPS 1. Okay. So what can take enzyme replacement? Hunter syndrome and Hurler syndrome are shown here. And then I have a whole bunch in red. I would point out that Hunter syndrome is X-linked deficiency, unlike the others. Okay. In the bottom left here, do you see that viral therapy is ongoing? And there's 2 links in the US and in the EU. So I've given continuing education talks to physicians, and they've come up afterwards and not known how to find a clinical trial for their patient, which kills me. Okay, so if you ever want a clinical trial in the US, it's clinicaltrials.gov. Okay. In addition, if like this link, it has a URL to clinicaltrials.gov with a search term. I think for glycosaminoglycans, I forget what it is. So that is always live. It always goes and researches it. So this will tell you the current clinical trials for these diseases, and the same is for the EU. They both are kind of active live. While I'm on that topic, clinical trials, because sometimes I'll talk about policy to you guys because you guys are going to be the ones to help shape policy. If you go forward, if you're approved in clinical trials, you now have to report the results. That's great. There's kind of a standardized way we can see that on clinicaltrials.gov. It's still the case that if you pull out of clinical trials, like there's side effects or something happens, you'll find a ton of clinical trials that don't have data, which is just killer to me because there's all this known information that the greater community cannot learn from. And so that is, I'm guessing lobbyists from pharma basically thought of that as proprietary knowledge that they didn't, want to share. But it's very frustrating when I actually have my college roommate this year, his son was diagnosed with Sanfilippo syndrome, which is extremely rare. So, there's clinical trials that you don't have the information of what went wrong. So we'll get into all that. What is the likelihood of these? Hurler is probably the most frequent, so at 1 in roughly 100,000. Hunter, again, X-linked is 1 in 160,000. These numbers vary a little bit based on the study. Sanfilippo looks like it's more prevalent, but it's actually a group of 4 diseases, remember? So combined, they're 1 in 70,000. And then Sly syndrome, it was hard to even get that number because it's so rare that people have a problem predicting the frequency because different countries seem to vary so much because it's just very rare. Okay. So those are recessive because those are enzymes that are deficient. Any question about those? Yes.
So for the Sanfilippo, you said combined there's 70,000? 1 in 70,000?
Yes, combined. And I think I made a mistake. Oh, no, I didn't. In that later on, I'll have a table that has this information, and I broke up the percentages by each one. Yeah. Sorry, the question was, actually it was recorded. Sorry, just yell it out, I'll repeat it.
If you give us, during an exam, what the problem is, or if it's Sanfilippo syndrome, should we know what that change looks like? Or should we just worry about,
Do you mean the digestion biochemistry pathway?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I'll speak to this when I show the grid. You should know how the patient presents, what enzyme is deficient, what builds up because of that, and then what is the treatment, okay? Later on, I don't know if we're gonna have time to get to this, but in the new, I was trying to give you guys more quiz questions and clinical presentations. In the very end, I have some cases